Thanks all for coming. I really appreciate you guys being here to listen to my speech. I want to tell you about the Battle of Alesia today. It was the last fight for Gallic freedom and for the Celts in Gaul, which is what modern-day France was for a rough feel of things. This happened in 52 BC at Alesia, as previously mentioned, which is near modern-day France's Elise Saint-Rene. I was inspired to do this by a man named Dan Carlin, who runs a podcast called Hardcore History. It's hardcore because most of the episodes are about 6 hours long. He calls himself an amateur historian, but I really don't see how that fits. I really want to tell you about how the Celts answered the question of what are you willing to give up for in your fight for freedom. We're going to talk about it from both Caesar's side and both from Vercingetorix, the king, or not the king, but the tribal leader in charge of most of the Celtic forces today. And, I've been interested in Roman history for a long time. I've learned a lot about it, and I'd like to pass some of that on to you and just share with you some of what interests me about Roman history. I think it's a good story, and it'll, really inspire you to think about what in your life would you be willing to give up if your freedom was at stake. Just an FYI, some of the only accounts of this battle were from Caesar's own handwriting, so there's a little bit of bias. Julius Caesar, well-known general in Rome. Some political and geographical setup, just so that way everybody's on the same page. Rome was a republic at the time, and it was run by consuls. Caesar had been a consul and was now a proconsul. He was 8 years into what should have been a 5-year proconsularship. He was trying to avoid having to pay for some of the crimes and enjoying the immunity that comes with consulship and proconsulship. Let's see. Caesar ran through Gaul, and he was kidnapping tribal children in order to convince those tribal chieftains to give him men and supplies and food and water. Vercingetorix, the tribal leader of one of the primary Gaelic tribes, actually came over and stole some of those children back from Caesar. He used it as an opportunity to call a big meeting between all the tribal leaders and have them amass a force that would take on Caesar in order to put a stop to him once and for all. That force, according to Hutchinson's Encyclopedia in their article on the Siege of Alesia, was about 80,000 men on foot and 15,000 on horse. Caesar only had about 50,000 legionaries, period. The Battle of Alesia that's coming up was said by John Sadler and Rosie Sardville in Caesar's Greatest Victory, the Battle of Alesia, Gaul 52 BC, to be very monumental, as failure would have been total defeat for Caesar, not just in Gaul, but in the Senate as well. It was really not only Caesar's last chance at his own life, but also his political career. The battle. There was a small battle outside of Alesia where Vercingetorix attacked Caesar. Caesar won this battle even though he was outnumbered, and Vercingetorix retreated and took over the city of Alesia. He built a moat, and he built a wall, and waited for Caesar. Finally, he sent out some of his cavalrymen, as he didn't need them to defend the city anymore, and asked them to bring reinforcements. Caesar arrives, and in 2 weeks he built a 10.9-mile perimeter with battlements against the city in order to lay it to siege, and he built another 12-mile perimeter behind him in order to defend against the siege that was coming from the reinforcements. The Celts, with their call for help, just had to hold out for a little bit longer. If you look over this picture right here, it's actually an illustration of some of Caesar's wonderful... it is a group of soldiers loading a catapult by Henry Mott. Those soldiers are loading the catapult built out of a lot of the forestry that was around Alesia at the time. That's how the Romans moved. They built things on the go as opposed to bringing a lot with them. Let's see here. So at one point, the Vercingetorix was getting hungry. There wasn't much food left in Alesia, and he actually sent out some of his people to Caesar in hope that that Caesar would feed him, or feed the people. But Caesar sent him right back, as he didn't want to drain his own resources, and a lot of these folks died just of starvation. That's a thing that tends to happen with sieges. Let's let's see here. The reinforcements finally appeared. Caesar says it was about 200,000. 120,000 is a better estimation. They attacked at night and fell into a lot of the traps that Caesar had set up, similar to what the Viet Cong did in the Vietnam War, with a lot of spike pits covered with leaves and all that jazz. As dawn breaks, Vercingetorix finally got his men together, and they started coming out of the city, but the reinforcements were already retreating, which means that the Romans just turned around and started fighting the other guys. Vercingetorix starts to lose the battle, but in this battle, Caesar points out, thanks to his in a video by History Savalis entitled "The Battle of Alesia," it's pointed out that Caesar really appreciated Mark Antony in his commanding and fighting for Caesar, and they became lifelong friends afterwards. After that, they ended up conquering the city of Alesia, and Vercingetorix, with his best armor and best sword and best horse, came out, walked around Caesar on his horse, got off his horse, laid everything down in front of him, and was taken into chains. And in those chains, he waited for 6 years before finally being taken back to Rome after a civil war. And from that civil war, Caesar gave himself a triumph, and in that triumph, he paraded Vercingetorix through the streets with a bunch of other prisoners until he was finally ceremoniously strangled at the end of the day. And he really answered the question of what were the Celts willing to give up for their freedom, and he answered it with his life. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.